All right, good evening, everyone. How are we? Welcome to the May AEVA meeting for Queensland branch. For anyone who hasn't already signed in and put their money in the tin, could you do so? We live stream, video record these meetings, so you can find them online. If Les hits the button, thanks. And the toilets, for anyone who's here for the first time, are just down the hallway there. Next one, mate. There's the National AEVA website. And these videos are on my YouTube channel. All right, tonight's meeting, we've got a bunch of speakers, and I'm going to do the normal EV events and planning stuff, as well as the infrastructure update. So we'll just get straight into it. Next one, Les. We've got a couple of events that have occurred after the last meeting in April and since this one in May. How was that, Les? Les, Gary? Was it well attended, or yeah?
Yeah.
How many EVs are?
Only us.
Just they were only asking for 2, were they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't ask for 2, but there was just a lot of people through the place.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. Perhaps next year we'll, because the year before 2019 we did about 10 or 20 there, but they weren't asking for that many this time.
No, I think this is the first time.
Oh, okay. All right. Next one. We did the monthly EV catch up, just a casual catch up at Toombul. And I think when it was all said and done, I counted 18 EVs, which wasn't the record, which is 23, but it was still very good, and more than the Gold Coast, yes. And we had Loretta from ABC Morning Radio was there too, asking questions and doing interviews, and that interview ended up on the radio on Monday morning, so a few people heard that, so it was pretty good. They're pretty popular, so I'm going to keep doing them. So coming up this month, we have the LEAF, or Logan Eco Action Festival. What suburb is that in? I should have probably put that on. Meadowbrook, okay. I put a couple of TOCA events on here from just to help those guys as well. They've got, on the same day, they're doing a car protection workshop. For those TOCA events, if you're interested, just let me know and I can shoot you an email with the details. But there was also an invite for the EV track day at the Norwell Motorplex, just down the highway. It's about $350 to go to that one, so it's a little bit expensive, but once again, if you're interested, let me know. The TOCA guys, so Husk Distillery is just inland of Kingscliff, so that'll be it's a 240 kilometre round trip, I believe, not just one way, and they go inland and back up, starting at the Logan IKEA. So got quite a list to get through, haven't we, really? We're doing the EV meetup at Sunshine Coast at the Coles at Budrum there that has the EV Networks charger. We have the RSCQ Motor Fest, the ACF holding an EV day at Holland Park, June 27, and a few new additions from last month. We've got, I'll let you know where the one for July is happening for the EV catch up, and where we've got the Carmageddon, which is quite a good event. That wasn't on last year, I don't think. It was on the year before, and that was quite good. They had a range of not so common EVs there, like I'm pretty sure the Nexo was there, the hydrogen one. They had a bunch of, that was the first time I saw the ACE band and stuff like that. So that was quite a good event 2 years ago. So we'll attend that one and see what that's like. I think Graham spoke there in 2019. And on the 29th of August, Renew have asked if we could help with or do a drive down to Toowoomba for the Toowoomba EV and Bike Expo that they want to hold. Following event stuff, we have some guys from RSEQ. Did you want to come up and mention an event that you guys wanted to hold? Put you on the spot? Yeah. While we're on the topic of events. Yeah.
I don't think I need a mic. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, but you need to speak into this for the videos.
Thanks for letting me tell me just briefly who we are and why we're here. Peter there is a colleague of mine. Peter works for RACQ training roadside assistance guys. I'm the manager of the group. Each roadside assistance section has a team, about 20 patrols. Each of those get a manager. About 20 on the force and up that way. Yeah. Okay, so we are a front line part of RACQ. In other words, you've got your Motorfest on there. We don't have anything to do with the organisation of Motorfest. From that point of view, we may not even attend, so we don't set any policy. We don't know anybody who sets any policies. Everything is very specific our job. Peter and his colleagues train patrols to be able to get the keys out of the car, get it going, and at least get it going. And I manage a group of patrols who do that. Who's got a car you can't lock the keys in? Good to see our hands up. Put your hands down and keep them down. Okay, we wish. Okay, there isn't any car you can't, by the way, is there? No. Okay, so that's what we do now. Training is in a fairly privileged position where it works with a lot of manufacturers directly, because a lot of manufacturers hire us to do their roadside assistance, including EV. I'd have to say, if you're asking us personally about EVs, we'd get fairly confident to say you'd be surprised just how much we know about EVs, even with the politics, the acceptance, what goes on. We've got to know that to provide roadside assistance. We're fairly confident with that. We know heaps about it, and we like them, and we play with them. And we've had good fun with a lot of even EV stuff that the manufacturer brings in. They don't really set it out to the public, but they let us have a play with it. It's been quite good. And me coming from a background of your V8 type heavy hitters, I love it. I just get addicted to that smooth torque power. That's what brings us here today. So again, we're not front line. So again, you look at that Motorfest, nothing to do with it. It's great. It's a long institution, nothing to do with it. But with the staff patrols, RACQ staff patrols, not contracts. Now, heaps of them are into cars. They just are into cars. The freedom, the mobility, the fun that cars are. They love it. And most of them modify them. Some have got some very, very fast race type cars that you might drive on the street. So they retrofit modern stuff on old cars, you know? They'll get a really old car, modern engine. Some of them we get a bit of a wry smile when you look at, we're looking after the planet. So you've got a large, high cubic inch V8 running on ethanol in an old car. So if you look at how the damage done to the environment to make that car over the years, amortised, and it runs on ethanol, it's cleaner than a lot of new cars you buy off the road. Just a bit of a wry smile we get to that sort of thing sometimes when we look at it. But what we do, I'm getting to the point here. So what we do is every now and then we have a closed event. COVID stopped it last year, but back on the road now. We have a closed event where the patrols can bring their vehicles and we just celebrate that. It's just a bit of a mini car show, get a bit of industry involved as well. And they do stuff for us, they're used to it. So we get some new car manufacturers and so forth. Just have a good fun evening night celebrating these cars. in the past, Tesla has directly supported us because it's such a closed event and it's not open to the public. They've actually supported us with some pretty cool stuff too. They've helped us out. This time we thought, so what you've got, particularly American major manufacturers, they're looking at making electric conversion kits that fit anywhere a small box Chevy will fit. And that's creating great interest for somebody who's wait for it to come out because they want to go the EV route because just that speed, just that power. So they're not after necessarily anything other than the fun of it. Yeah. Okay. From any other point of view. But we still support that. So I called Graham and said, hey, do you want to come along? So it's a closed event, 3rd of June. RSEQ owns Mount Cotton Driving School, Centre of Excellence, they call it Motoring Centre of Excellence. So we're going to use that. So it's shut, it's closed, it's only us there. We'll bring the patrols in, and we wanted some EVs there, particularly the many different ones we can get. You find some people convert ICE engines into electric. So I asked him, I was talking to you this morning, and then he says, well, how about you come along and ask everybody at once, which is how we ended up here. And then I said, do you want to come along? So that help us. It's just a fun. They're not really that strange bedfellows, these high performance internal combustion engines and electric, not as strange bedfellows as you think. Some of these blokes are easier to convert because they're just after different cars. They love cars and they love the power of electric cars. So they're more open-minded than the general public than we see. Yeah, it's strangely enough, which is why Tesla's been there.
Tesla's been there, like I said, last time we had everything from hybrid Camrys through to lone big box Chevys. We've even got representation of people from the full driving industry. A lot of things that are happening in the full driving industry, lithium batteries now available as cranking batteries and available as batteries and caravan, the systems that go on with all of that. So they're coming along basically saying, hey, this is what we plan. You will see these lithium-ion batteries and cranking batteries in normal vehicles out there. Here's what happens when you leave the lights on, they shut themselves off at 11.5 volts, and you need to be able to reset them to get them to come back to life, that sort of thing. So they're going to come along and have a little bit of involvement as well, and hamburgers all that.
So there you go. I've asked, I'll leave it up to you as an organisation to work out what you're going to do to support us, if anything, by the time you ask it. Peter, because he, yes, sorry.
So people with cars come along.
Come along.
Bring a friend, bring a wife, bring kids, bring anyone. Okay. People with
I'll leave a crunched up flyer. So this is what our patrols get. It says here, you may be cool, but you'll never be Spock leaning on a Buick Riviera cool. Right? But you can come along to our things. So I'll just put that there. I'll leave it with you.
So that's got the date and so forth. Yeah, anyone's welcome, and it's not really a RSVP or whatever. Just rock up on the night, and it's a, I don't know whether you've been there, but it's a massive area. It's just, hey, park over there, and everybody just walks around and looks at different cars. And like I said, it's a very different atmosphere. It's not a burnout competition or anything.
Oh, no.
Absolutely,
especially not out there. No.
Especially not out there. It's just a display of cars, and you get some very interesting people out there that from all different parts of the automotive industry, policy makers, all that sort of stuff. It's actually quite it's a fun one.
And now we literally picked this up on the way out of the door. So we do have patrol vehicles that can basically quickly charge EV. Anyone want to know about this?
Yeah, go for it, mate.
All right, so this is a couple of years ago. This company came out with, we probably saw the promotion that they had like a very type setup that in the photos look really small and really convenient and really sort of like inaccessible on the fire. It was basically about the size of 20-litre jerry can and had the charging unit on it. However, that's something that we want to look into to basically something we control, how we're going to charge up vehicles on the side of the road, what the need is, all that sort of thing. So we got onto that company and said, hey, this is excellent, what can you do? Well, we don't actually make it yet. We haven't perfected it yet. And basically everything that we showed you in the video is just a fake piece of plastic hooked in. It didn't actually exist. So we went, okay then, but we're working on it, they said. So there's a university or whatever over there in the state, and they've been plugging away at it, and now they've got a few different systems on the market. They still do the jerry can one, but it's a lot bigger than a jerry can and a hell of a lot heavier. So this is what they call the Roadie Spark Charge, fairly new thing. We've got the first couple in the country that I'm aware of, and we brought them in as a bit of a trial. Now, that unit there isn't actually the battery. So that's just the piece that goes on top of the battery. The battery is the same size as that, and it just stacks on the ground, and that sits on top of it. Each battery, 3.7 kilowatt, 3.2 usable kilowatts. You really need 2 or 3 of them, 3 I'd say minimum, if you wanted to make any sort of a dent on the Tesla on the side of the road. So each one of those batteries weighs 30 kilos, so it's not quite as portable as they made out it was. But yes, you lug it out, stack them up on the side of the road. This just clicks on top of it, and then you just got a chatter mode charger there, and we got adapters with it for a Tesla and everything else. But it was just something we got in to say, hey, is it going to work? How's it going to work? And we were actually looking from the point of view of maybe successful and work well, that we could have them in various places where our battery, where our patrols go to restock their batteries during the day, and they can go, hey, we've got a job on an EV, swing past, pick that up, put it in the vehicle, take it there, use it, bring it back, put it on charge for the next guy. So that was sort of the thinking. Whether that happens or not, I've no idea. That was the kind of. How much you're probably going to ask? That with 2 battery packs is around 15 grand. Now, they do, if you get on their website, a DC quick charger one, but it starts at $51,000. So, depending on what your use is. But anyway, like I said, it's something different, and unless you get these things and try them, you never really know what's going to work.
Well, with the availability of chargers around Brisbane especially, I wouldn't have thought this would be the primary way to charge a car. You probably just tow to the closest charger.
Well,
and
yeah.
then, but in rural applications, it's probably worthwhile.
Surprisingly, we found, so we do offer an EV charging service through our tech training department. And some of you tonight I was talking to earlier and said, oh, most EV owners are pretty good. And yeah, you are. But where it all falls down is government departments. So a lot of the government departments that have Nissan Leafs and Ionics and this sort of thing, and they park them in a basement for 6 months, and we need to be able to get it from there. So we go down, get it going, just to get it out of the car park and to the charge point. Or, as a lot of the jobs we do, the person driving the car is completely and utterly clueless and as surprised as anybody when it actually stops. So they go, it doesn't go anymore, and we have to go there and put 10 k's worth of range on it to get it to the nearest charging point. So even though they're close by, people do still run out of the thing, but it's not so much people that own EVs, it's people that their government department's told them they've got to drive one, and they may deliberately do
Somebody hired one from a resort or something like that.
But some of the owners don't. The owners don't,
Yeah, well, yeah. That I think your application there is,
Another thing to remember is, though, if a government department is looking at buying a fleet of EVs, they want to know what support is available. So they call us and they go, can you provide roadside assistance to EVs? Yeah, we change tyres, whatever. Can you do a quick charge? Yes. So it's no good us saying, well, you just have to organise that yourself before you go to another. So we can actually answer their question, and that makes it more likely that they will go down that road to buy a fleet. So
well, you have the tow trucks as well.
Yeah.
The tow trucks have
The guys came and had a chat about them.
So you've seen that system where it's basically just an inverter that puts a bit of charge in it, so that when they unload it, it's got enough power to get it to the charge point.
Yeah.
And that's a different application.
You'd have to say, though, people don't drive until they're discharged.
We'd hope not, no.
Well, you'd hope not.
I think you find out pretty early that that's not the thing to do.
Yeah.
And even if you've been a petrol or diesel driver that does do to zero, because you know there's a buffer underneath in petrol terms, but you don't do it when there's a battery. So
in the time we've been offering the service, I'd say we've probably done about 8 jobs. Most of them, I'd say, just bar one of them, which I know what you're talking about, which is the son borrowed it, or his father was overseas, were government departments, either Ionics or Nissan Leafs. And again, the people that were driving them had no idea.
Yeah, right. Okay, very good. Thank you very much for bringing that in and showing us. All right, let's get back on track after that impromptu speech. All right, so 3rd of June. I'm trying to remember that one. So the first thing in June, 3rd of June. So what day is the 3rd of June? Just Thursday. Okay. Thursday evening. All right. Let's see how we go. We'll move on to the EV infrastructure. Okay. So interestingly, this has been spotted at the Toombul shopping centre where we just had the last EV catch up, but in the underneath car park where the AC charging was. Now these AC charging stations have been moved over to where the other EV Link, I think it is, or yeah, the other AC 22 kilowatt charger is. And now these are interesting. I've stolen this picture. I didn't draw the circle, but they're Tesla superchargers version 3, which are actually the brand new ones that I believe can do 250 kilowatt. So we have, I don't think there's any of those in Australia at the moment. So Toombul's pretty well off in terms of charging for any site in Australia, let alone before they were doing these. So this is going to be pretty much where, and this is really why we choose Toombul for where we start the EV cruises from, because it is it has lots of charging options there. So yeah, we might have to, I'm going to go and check that out when that's all released. I don't know any other data other than this picture was just from this in the last month of them getting installed. So I'll let you know at the next meeting. The MG dealership have installed this wall DC charger. Now on plug share, so this is at Springwood. So on the plug share, it says 22 kilowatt DC, but on the other pictures for this plug, it actually has max output 25 kilowatt. So it's a 25 kilowatt DC charging unit. So when you consider the normal tritium chargers and how tall they are, that's going to be interesting. I might have to get a MG along down there one day and test out what this charging speed is, because I'm not sure what the infrastructure is behind that charger to get it 25 kilowatt DC, but well, you know, I guess that's not that surprising. So it's a Delta charger with MG badge, is it? Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks, Liz. The other news, I don't know how well known this is, but EV Networks are putting in another 350 kilowatt site at Bundamba. This has been on PlugShare for quite a while. However, this is only from the last couple of days, this picture, and you can see them just where the charging heads are going to go, but it's going to have two 350 kilowatt chargers again, just same as Cooching Creek. But the problem at Bundamba was actually that it's somewhat floodplain. So they've apparently put a transformer was going in today, I believe, 2 meters off the ground. So for flood resistance, flood proofing they call it, but yeah, we'll see, flood resistance. All right, so just what I quickly wanted to run through is just the staggering amount of DC fast charging options we have in Southeast Queensland now, because so I won't go through each one, but I mean, what is there? At least 10 there on the Sunshine Coast. Brisbane North side, next one, Les. So there's a bit of a gap there on the Brisbane North side. I mean, what we're here somewhere. But we've got North Lakes and then pretty much the CBD. We've got on the south side, including sort of the Ipswich area, there's another 6, and that's the Bundamba one there, and that's the MG dealership one there. Really, there's a bit of a gap on the Bayside, and every opportunity I let people that are in these businesses know that we could do with one out at Cleveland, because that seems like a bit of an opportunity there. And on the Gold Coast, yeah, we've got another bunch again. So Gold Coast City Council have put all those in, and they're 75 kilowatts mostly for those. So really, I just wanted to give a quick wrap up, because I know I do talk a lot about the EV charging, but we are quite privileged with the volume that we have compared to other major cities around. So just thought I'd make that point. All right, that's it for what I'm having to say. So now we'll get into the speakers for the night. First up, we'll have Alina, and she has started a business called Give It a Whirl, and she's going to come up and have a chat about that now. We've had Alina on once before, but things have progressed, and time for an update.
Thanks everyone for having me. I have come before to ask for your information as part of a survey, so I have some of those results to share, but bear with me while we get there. If you could go forward. So I'm just going to ask you for a minute to imagine something. Close your eyes if you feel comfortable. Imagine you're 10 years again, and you're scooting down your neighborhood street in your scooter. The wind's blowing in your face, the beads of sweat are dripping, and you see your friend standing in their driveway watching you without their own scooter. And as you whiz by, you stop and pull up the scooter and say, would you like to give it a whirl? And this concept, you can go forward to the next slide, for me is about an opportunity to test drive electric vehicles. It's something that we as EV owners do very regularly, and it's something that Whirl will help customers experience. So we know the electric vehicle market is growing rapidly, and especially overseas. But in Australia, that change is coming, and I think we can all see it this year more than we have in the past. Lots of new products coming to market, lots of new chargers, and lots more opportunities for us to share in those experiences with others. Next slide, please. But in 2019, only roughly 7,000 new cars of the 1 million sold in Australia were electric. So that's showing us that there's still a problem. Next slide, please. Part of the problem we know exists in policy. There's a mismatch between the supply and the demand side of the equation. We have people saying that Australians need more diversity, more low-cost electric vehicles, but then on the flip side saying that there isn't enough consumer demand, so we won't put forward an agenda on the policy front to encourage adoption. So there's clearly a mismatch. Next slide, please. And also a problem on the consumer side. So as we all know, it's hard work figuring out how to buy and operate an electric car, especially if you want to charge it using renewable energy, or plan a trip to the Tweed to go to a distillery. There's a little bit involved, a little bit more than what we're used to. And often if we're looking to buy one, the salesperson is not helpful. I don't know about you, but I've got a couple of stories about my experience trying to buy an EV that were less than optimal. Can anyone else relate? Just a few, yeah, you can go forward. But now I think compared to when I started working on electric vehicles back in 2006 at Tesla, the paradigm for us has changed. It's not just about transitioning our cars, but it's about transitioning our lifestyles to one that is a sustainable ecosystem. So where we have the privilege or the ability to own a home, we want the car, we want that's electric, we want renewable energy powering it, we want battery storage, capturing any residual energy that we can use at times in the evening, for example, when we have high loads. And we want to do our part to contribute to a sustainable outcome. We want to also have financial savings, and we want to be part of a community of these do-gooders doing the right thing and living our best lives. So how do we help our neighbors and friends and peers achieve this outcome? Next slide, please. Well, Whirl is one opportunity for that. The concept behind Whirl, Give It a Whirl, is bringing our colleagues together to empower them through research, through test drives, and through sharing peer experiences to adopt clean energy technologies. So what Whirl does is provide a digital platform to do a lot of what we do at sustainability events on the weekends. But for some of us, like myself, who struggle to get there because we have young families, but are much more inclined to do so online, Whirl provides that opportunity. I'll just give you a case study here. So this is John. He buys a new car every 10 years. This year he wants to buy an EV. He researched online and even visited the car dealer, but that person wasn't particularly helpful. So who can he trust to help him make his purchase decision? Next slide. Well, here's Molly. Molly bought her EV a year ago and she loves to talk to people about it. People stop her on the street. She's happy to chat to them about what she's done. She shares those experiences with her friends and family. And what if Molly could connect with John? Please. So what we have here is a couple of stats from the survey that I completed before. I just wanted to share you some of the outcomes because they relate to the, well, what if Molly met John? I think the font's a little small for you, but I'll have the slides available for after and I'll talk through them now. So when I asked you to participate in a survey, or yourselves and many of the other AEVA members nationally, I had more than 200 complete the survey. I asked, how many electric vehicles might you like to try before buying one? And the answer was that more than 34% of respondents wanted to try 3 or more. And why that's important is it means that people don't necessarily decide they want to try an EV, go to a car dealership, try one, and then buy it. They have a very long journey, and that's where events like the ones that this group put on and others are so important. As is important being able to come to meetings and meet people where you can have an opportunity to test drive their car, maybe even go in for a passenger ride. But if you can't do either of those, then you'll be looking for more opportunities. And as we are trying to create more opportunities to get people into cars. Next slide, please. Another question I asked was, where are you most likely to seek out a test drive for an EV? Over 75% of people said the car dealer, which means that they're not very informed about alternatives to that mechanism. So we know that special events, car rental companies, or through a friend are options for that, but creating another avenue for electric vehicle interests to be realized through test driving is something that Whirl seeks to achieve, not immediately, but in the long run. Next slide, please. So in terms of doing your research, those of you who have researched an electric car, I think have used many media, but I did ask my participants to tell us which resource was most useful. And interestingly, the overwhelming response for people shopping for an electric car and those who'd already owned them was watching videos on YouTube, as well as engaging with social media forums like Facebook groups. It's really interesting. Next slide, please. And lastly, which resource was the least useful? Can anyone guess, or would you like to read it? The car dealer. Interestingly, that's sort of the place where people go to sign paperwork now, it seems. So to the extent that we can provide opportunities outside of that normal dealership experience, I think we'll see more and more of that happening in the next year. Next slide, please. So what Whirl does specifically is provide an online forum for people to do their own research. So we already have tons and tons of resources available. The AEVA is a really great repository of those facts. So just directing people to that info through another channel. Talking to an expert. So what Whirl will do is convene a forum of ambassadors, which are EV owners like yourselves who have volunteered their time to provide advice by telephone, video, or an in-person demonstration. And seal the deal in an in-person demo. So over time, we'll have the ability to offer test drives that you can book online. But in the short term, it will be expert conversations and demonstrations. Next slide. Just a high level about how the business model works. Sorry, I didn't mean for those boxes to pop up like that on this slide anyway. You can just click them through. So the idea is grow the community of users online to provide shopping support and then offer product referrals. So bulk buying of EV charging, for example, or electricity retail accounts are all opportunities for Whirl to provide access to energy products as well as transport products in the Australian sector. Next slide. And why start with electric cars? So when we talk about creating sustainable ecosystems, electric cars, as we know, are the conduit into so many other sustainable technologies. And they're tactile, they're understood by people, they're actually really exciting. And we know that there is a user base of really engaged owners that can be helpful. And I'll just add that there's obviously a lot of evidence that bums on seats sells cars. So we know that test drives are really the most important attribute in converting an interested party into an EV owner. And these are just a couple of photos from my experience doing test drives. My parents in their Model 3, and when we first gave them a test drive in a Tesla, my experience working in the Queensland government back in the day. In fact, I had a photo which I didn't in the end include here, but I had brought that same AEVA in here back in, I don't know, 2010, I think it might have been, as one of the first electric vehicles in Queensland. And that's my daughter, who's now a bit older, but she's actually only ever been in an EV, which is such a cool thing. I'm expecting that will be the only type of car she drives for most of her life, if she drives. You can go ahead. That's right. Well, probably not that car, but yes, a future car. So just in terms of the business and why this way, we're launching a pilot of World's EV ambassadors. So we have 50 recruited. We'll probably start with half of those in the next month. And what those will be are online EV owners that are available to talk to people who are interested in buying an electric car. So essentially displacing the car dealer information collecting experience, but really offering a digital avenue for that. And similarly, or alongside that, in parallel, aligning strategic partnerships to help industry support that conversion as well. That pilot is meant to test the model. So if the model works and is successful, it will develop further up into the point where we raise capital to grow the business. Go ahead. So if you're interested in becoming part of what Whirl is working on, please sign up to register for the EV Ambassador Program. If you're an EV owner and you want to give it a try, you're happy to talk to electric vehicle shoppers about your experiences, give them some stories about what you've done, feel free. If you're interested just to follow and track progress, giveitawhirl.co is the URL, or you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And I'd just like to introduce my colleague, Rami's here. She's here to speak after me. So Rami is been supporting Whirl and is a race engineer. And I brought her along both to show the team, but as well as to talk about any of her experiences in the sector. All right. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Romy. I'm originally from Germany, and I haven't been much related to the EV industry, or don't own an EV. I'm working in the motorsport industry, and the reason why I came along and also offered to talk a little bit is I just have all these, I always see all the technology back in Germany from my friends and colleagues I worked with. Obviously, they are a bit ahead compared to Australia, but then I thought like, oh, it's already here as well, and it's gonna come here. So I reached out to Alina and asked, so where or how can I get into the EV industry here in Australia? There must be something here already. And then she tracked me along.
The mic dies.
What's that?
The mic dies.
Okay.
Try again.
Hello? Yeah. So yeah, that's why I just came along today and obviously work with her on Will. And yeah, she said, if anyone has any questions regarding motorsport or racing, they can ask me as well. We here in Australia, we don't have any electric racing yet, but in Europe, there's quite a bit there. There's a whole Formula E. It's just electric racing already, and that's actually really popular over there now, and gets more and more traction. And yeah, hopefully they come over here one day as well.
Who wants electric motorsport in Australia? Anyone?
Yeah.
Okay, see?
No, I would like it too. Like I always suggest it would be an awesome like racing around Sydney or Gold Coast or whatever, not just the loud and stinky cars, but yeah, cool electric cars. They have really cool race formats as well, where they, in the beginning, they changed, the driver changed the vehicle, and yeah, it's just something totally new and fan boost, so the driver who's popular get a bit more extra and so on, yeah. Ja. Können Sie Deutsch sprechen? Yeah.
Rome is actually, you work, what team? Did you
Yeah, I
work
work with,
V8 Supercar?
yeah, correct. Like with the Red Bull, used to be a Red Bull Holden racing team. It's not Holden anymore. Yeah, a Red Bull Ampol Racing. Yeah, it's a 888 race engineering. We are based in Banyo, just over there. We are doing the supercars, but also the development series as well as GT3 racing with the AMG GT3.
Any questions about V8 supercars while we're here? I know it's not the normal forum question. do you happen to know if, like, there's, because I assume after every race, you're pulling the motors down and doing a brand, like, refreshing them every time. Do you know if that has to occur with electric e-motorsport?
I'm not sure what's the service on these electric cars or like the batteries or whenever they need to replace them, but it's definitely the same procedure that the whole car gets, like each part gets taken apart. I mean, on our cars, it's a gearbox and the engine and so on, but I'm pretty sure it's there as well, because that's, yeah, would be the normal procedure after each race. When you go back to your home base, your workshop, and within your workshop, you have the departments, like for us, it's our damper department, sub-assembly, engine department, and everything gets taken apart from the car, gets serviced, repaired if needed, replaced due to mileage, and then get put back onto the race cars and go to the next event.
Yeah. Well, that'd be interesting to find out if that same process is really occurring for electric.
Yeah, I definitely, I know some people working in the Formula E racing, so I can definitely follow up on that and ask which parts they will need to replace, which parts they need to service when. And yeah, it's also a learning process, because for us, we know after 5,000 kilometers, we need to replace the gearbox, for example. But yeah, that's been since experience from quite a couple of years. I'm not sure how they go, because I think that's the third or fourth year. They've probably fourth year they're in season now. It's the second generation of the whole. Yeah. Oh yeah. 7 season. Yeah. Oh yeah, you know. Don't even need to be here. Nah, I'm not sure. Yeah, true. At the racetracks itself, you mean like for people visiting?
For the race cars.
Like I said, you probably knows better now. I know at the beginning they changed the cars, right? Do they still do, or they charge?
First 2 years, first 4 years they changed the car.
Yeah.
Now Gen 2, so they've got 50.
Exactly.
So that's 45 minutes plus.
And that's enough for them, the races. Yeah, I know they have the Gen 2 cars now. But yeah, 7 years, I don't know. Yeah, I remember when I came to Australia 2015 and it was just kicking off there. Yeah, so must be. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for speaking.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't really prepared.
I'll grab that off. Thanks. I'm very supportive of what Alina's trying to do. I'm definitely going to be one of the advocates for her business. So if you're also interested, as a tester straight up, so I'm happy to do that. I've already done 100 test drives with people, so doing it anyway. So if anyone else is interested, let me know, and we'll get that going, right? So thank you for speaking. Next we have Steve, and he is doing some interesting things commercially, and he's done a presentation. He's going to have that. Steve owns a Nissan Leaf as well, and is looking to get an iPace soon.
iPace is ordered. In fact,
iPace is ordered.
We have 5 ordered.
Thank you, Steve.
So I have this wonderful presentation written And then John put out the agenda and I saw that we'd got the even more wonderful Stephanie speaking after me. And there's a bunch of my slides that I thought that just won't work. It's just not fair because Macro Data, the company that now owns Solar Drive and Hydro Drive, is a green energy company. What we do is, if we can go to the next slide, that just gives us a sense of where we're at. But our purpose for existing comes off the back of the research of one of our co-founders. And our mission is to deliver green energy solutions and to make sure that when we're delivering green transportation solutions, all of the energy going into these vehicles is clean. So where we originally started in providing solar solutions for high-rise and shared electric vehicles in the basement, we were storing that energy. We've now moved on to utility scale. So our next 4 implementations, non-vertical, involve solar facilities of around 120 megawatts with 80 megawatts of energy storage. So we're looking on those sites to deliver something like 5 tons of hydrogen a day, part of which is used just for storing and firming power overnight, but part will be used as a liquid fuel for fuel cell EVs. So we're about making it clean and making a complete loop ecosystem. So we have a bunch of patents and technologies. If you can go to the next slide. That's not going to help me, but never mind. So what do we do and where do we do it? We started life 4 years ago, and our first project was a building in Chermside where we've put 50 kilowatts of solar on the roof. We were then at the time running a Outlander FEV as the shared vehicle. So all of the owners and residents of the building could book the shared use EV. They pay a per kilometre charge to use it. And so the mechanism was designed to allow, a lot of these buildings only have 1 car parking spot per apartment. And so to allow a shared use EV in the basement, and so we replaced the FEV with the Nissan Leaf that I've got parked outside. You can book it using an app. Your door key fob will unlock the Leaf, enable it, you go off, you drive your Ks and you get charged against your power bill in your unit for however many kilometres you had it for at 55 cents a kilometre. COVID meant that shared vehicles didn't work very well for us. So we then had to find and had been working towards other uses of EVs. So I'm just going to cover across a bunch of these that we've either done, have designed, have engineered for clients. So we've got a project ongoing with a major hotel chain where we're going to be providing both mid-tier and top-tier EVs to rent to clients. So the trial site that's just about to be built will have 4 Jaguar I-Pace and 2 Nissan Leafs available with 22 kilowatt charging in the basement of the hotel, but at reception level, we're going to be putting in a 75 kilowatt fast charger. And what that's going to do for that organisation is allow more stickiness for the guests to come, use the cafe, use the other facilities in the hotel, and that's going to allow charging for those clients on a subsidised basis, as well as the quick top-ups for the cars that belong to the hotel fleet.
So you haven't announced who that is and where that is?
I can't give you the name or the location yet, but as soon as I can, I will. And again, we'll be pulling together some deals for people to come up and help us launch it. So the hotel has already understood the need to engage with this community. And so they're going to put on a bunch of specials that we can include charging and various other bits. So, and as their chain is 102 facilities across the east coast of Australia, there's going to be more and more of that being done. So there's also a mobility provider on the Sunshine Coast who does disability and reduced mobility transport services, and they're building their new headquarters on the Sunshine Coast, very near the Sunshine Coast Hospital at the moment. There's a deal just going through to provide them and via 4 hospital sites for community drivers the ability to get people in for treatment at low cost. So a volunteer can pick up an EV, drive the route of picking up people to run them in for chemo and back, and that's part of a project we're doing with Wishlist at the moment. So again, there'll be a commercial announcement following that soon. We've got a project for one of the blood taking services, and so most of our vehicle projects, for obvious reasons, involve back to base. So there's an awful lot of businesses where they have a return to base, and so wherever possible, we're designing those projects so where they've got a large enough roof area, we'll collect solar for them, we'll store it until they charge the vehicles, and we're moving towards hydrogen through fuel cell powering chargers is our next phase of that. So we will deliver liquefied hydrogen to site to run back through Bowsers off any of our utility scale sites. Can I have the next slide, please? So that's just we have a bunch of patents that came off the back of a PhD. So this is about how we recycle and keep all of the energy in the system. So it allows us to store, and there was a bunch of patents that relate to vehicle to grid technology. So it's a specific application for a body environment with embedded networks. So what it enables us to do is operate behind the meter in these strata communities without having to be an energy retailer. Next slide, please. So projects that we're working on at the moment: grid displacement and grid firming. So there's a number of large enterprises across Australia where to upgrade the grid because of their geographic location. So there's one between here and Caboolture that to upgrade their site, they wanted a $17 million grid upgrade to allow them to have the new power that they needed to manage their expansion. That's not something that's attractive to them. So they will be putting in a large-scale solar facility that we will use to firm that site up. That, together with the PEM technology, will enable them to gradually, over the next 5 years, replace their trucking fleet from diesel to hydrogen. So we've got test vehicles available to us that are coming off the back of the New Zealand Hydrogen Highway project. So we're working with a company called Horizon, who are, Horizon parent company, Hyzon is how they're known. And they're delivering hydrogen vehicles into Australia by taking OEM trucks and replacing the fuel cell and power plants. Grid firming, grid displacement, so those two sit very similarly. The reason we were acquired by the Macro Data company is that they're building off-grid data centres in regional Queensland. And the biggest problem with trying to do anything of any scale in regional Queensland, two big problems being power and comms. So they acquired us, and they acquired a communications company in order to deliver that. We're being left with a good amount of autonomy to deliver our own projects as well, but we're building 2 120 megawatt facilities with hydrogen storage so that they can run that data center 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on 100% green energy. Vertical strata, as I said, that's where we kind of started life. A couple of high-rise buildings that we've got and a few more to come. Horizontal strata, we've started to provide facilities for high-tech business parks. Again, because the cost of grid connection, as soon as you get out of the metro areas, becomes difficult for main use. And we're working on a project up in the Lockyer Valley where they can't get any tenants into their new industrial facilities because the cost of power is too expensive. So solar's great for the 5.5 hours a day it shines, but unless you can store that energy and level it out across the day, it becomes very, very uncompetitive for people to move into these environments. So we've got projects there heading in that direction. We're working with a number of local authorities, and I'll get into that in a minute. And diesel displacement, it staggered me when we started getting into some of these, how many sites actually still run with diesel generation. And it also surprised me how many charging facilities I found around the country where they're using diesel generators to run 50 kilowatt chargers. So we're working in a space where everything we do has to be 100% clean. We're not interested in anything else. So we're replacing, for a number of these large-scale quarrying clients, their diesel generation on site with hydrogen and fuel cell technology, closed loop. So we've got bus systems, but mainly trucking systems using 40-ton trucks, going back to base each day. And yeah, we're looking at a number of boating applications as well, but nothing in that space has got beyond the idea space for us at the moment. Next slide, please, Les. Apartment buildings, we've talked about, commercial office towers. Here's an interesting one. We've got just short of 1,000 unit up in Yeppoon, and they're looking at the idea of providing multiple EVs on that same shared usage, shared ownership, so that they're minimizing the number of vehicles on site, they're keeping the site as clean as they can. And additionally, as people go through that phase of their life, because it's a application-based, book the vehicle, use it when you can, unlock it with your fob, lock it back with your fob, it gives them the ability in conjunction with the doctors to limit or restrict people's usage. So if they have conditions on their license that stop them driving when it's dark, as an example, they can actually use the technology that we've added to the vehicles to stop them being able to take a vehicle when it's not safe for them to do so. Hotel complexes we've talked about. And again, we've got a project running with some high-tech research facilities for vehicles in and around campus. Next slide, please. I know we talking about EVs, but fuel cell EVs are pure electric vehicles. They all have to run a battery because of the process to convert hydrogen via the fuel cell. But where we were working with one of the largest quarrying groups, they were 3 years into a battery trial for their trucks, and what they realized, no matter how much they tried and tested it, the 2,000 kilograms of battery that they required for these vehicles, and therefore the about 5% loss in tear weight, made those projects unviable, no matter how cheap the trucks were. We can deliver a fuel cell EV under the weight of a diesel truck with 95 kilograms of hydrogen on, which matches their day payload. So that will deliver them 600 kilometres. Interestingly, also, Australian design has proved to be a major challenge. And so Hyzon's way around that is to buy a Mac or a Kenworth or something like that, strip the technology out, so buy it as a rolling chassis and retrofit or integrate with those manufacturers rather than designing brand new vehicles for the space. So we're finding far more innovation and integration in that space than the battery vehicle providers who are designing from scratch. But for us, as I say, what matters for us is the cleanliness of the input. We're not interested in dirty fuel in any form. So the electricity that produces the hydrogen, the green hydrogen in our case, has to be 100% renewable, and we're only interested in green hydrogen. Next slide, please, Les. Closed loop or network infrastructure. We've looked at where we've been looking at projects for Local authorities, they're looking at putting a number of refuelling facilities across their council area. But where we're dealing with quarrying companies, abattoirs, food processing facilities, they're working on a back to base, so that in most cases those trucks, in fact in every case those trucks are going back home every night. Next slide please, Les. So what makes what we do slightly different from what a bunch of other people do is that we're providing a complete system. So in the case of the quarrying company, they're going to pay a price per kilometre for their trucks. And so we're providing them, in effect, a wet lease. So everything other than the cost of the driver is delivered to them in a price per kilometre basis. That way, we're able to take best advantage of manufacturer grants, state and federal government grants, and deliver them a project such that they can do something that's good for the world and good for their bottom line as a business. So they can deliver a hydrogen fuel cell truck for 10% cheaper than the diesel alternative. And that's right now when the prices are still high because it's still a new technology. Next slide, please, Les. In fact, I think this is me bringing it to an end. So we deliver power, vehicles in all sorts of forms, and because there's a comms company as part of the family too, we're delivering high-speed internet so we can manage all of these facilities. I think that's the last one. Any questions?
Questions?
Yes.
What government policy changes would you need to see to support this transition process in your opinion?
Any of it would be useful, but the reality is that we accept that it's not going to come in time for it to matter to our business. So 12 months ago, most of the projects we were quoting and building for clients were working on the basis of a hoped for arena grant to match 50% of the CapEx cost. We've moved on beyond that point. We realised that as a commercial entity, that's not going to get, the government, both state and federal, isn't going to get there in time for us. So everything we're building right now stands on its own commercially. So whilst it would make it potentially easier, the reality is that the conditions around those policy changes are often too narrow to be of value to an organisation like ours. So we built assuming that we can't get it.
I've got a question for you, Steve.
Sure.
The hot topic pretty much around Australia is an EV tax. How does an EV tax affect what you're doing business-wise?
So we're watching it very closely. We've factored the cost. We've got sort of 4 potential Victorian projects on the books. We've modelled it. And it's still, I mean, it eats into the margins somewhat, but we can still make it work. We think that because of the CSR benefits to the organisations involved and the fact that they're cleaning up their books as ASX listed companies, that whilst it will hurt us in the short term, long term, it will play its way out both for us and the organisation, but somebody's got to pay for it. And so it will go on the per kilometre rate.
Your parent company, what country are they from?
Australia.
It is Australia.
Yep.
And they not publicly?
No. The 3 founders are all based on the Sunshine Coast.
Any other questions? All good? It's very interesting, I think. Hydrogen around here is normally a bit of a dirty word. Last meeting, everyone was fidgeting in their seats when we spoke about but it's good to hear that useful.
There's a whole use case argument, and so this is a massive generalisation, but as an organisation, when we're talking to large corporates, we help them think about it in terms of anything that they use a petrol vehicle for, we would always lean towards a battery vehicle for, because it generally makes more sense, is more economic. And anything that's heavy diesel usage for them, a hydrogen solution is usually a better fit. I mean, yes, I could pick myself up a or something like that as I'm in the process of changing my vehicle. There isn't a hydrogen vehicle that meets my needs currently, as well as the iPace is about to. So
Where do you fuel it?
where would I fuel it? I'm going to be making hydrogen. So I'm going to
Oh,
have,
you are.
yeah, exactly. So, but again, it doesn't make sense. The reason that I held off changing the Leaf as long as I did was that I couldn't use it for most of my longer trips because the charge time was too long. The fact that there's enough high-speed chargers now between here and Bundaberg for me means that that's now a viable option. And so a couple of weeks, here we go. Yes.
Sorry, is a hydrogen combination still more efficient than diesel, for example, a train?
There's a lot of different ways of measuring this. So the process to make hydrogen requires often a lot more energy. So if you want to measure it purely in terms of kilowatts in, kilowatts out, the higher cost of producing the fuel often makes that not a reasonable comparison. But to give you a different kind of example, we're looking at hydrogen at $3.50 a kilo, which is the equivalent, and a kilo of hydrogen in a 40-ton truck will give us 10 kilometres, which is very attractive compared to the diesel equivalent. Sure, no problem.
All right.
Any more for any more?
Well, thank you very much, Steve. Very interesting, that one. Yeah, we might get you back again some other time, maybe next year, and see what you're up to, because that sounds like a lot of projects going on.
There's an awful lot going on, but in order to make the progress we need to, so what I didn't even get into there is compressed air energy storage. There's a whole bunch of time shifting technologies.
Yeah.
We're spending an awful lot of work on with partners. I mean, we're not manufacturing anything. We've got some very clever software solutions.
Yeah.
But we're taking products from around the world and bringing them to life the market.
Yeah, okay, excellent. Steph, you're up. Steph spoke at our 2018 EV Expo. I'm not sure, she was in one of the videos that I put together from that. You work for EDL, is it? I got it right, EDL. And this, you're going to talk about moving towards 100% renewables in what capacity?
In remote networks. So,
excellent. Oh, there you go. It's up on the screen. All right. Thank you very much. If it goes off, I'll just pop it on.
okay, thanks a lot. Thanks for inviting me here. I did make it clear that I don't actually have a discussion about cars. So this is about how we get to 100% renewables in an islanded network. So this means that you have no grid access whatsoever in these locations. So just pop ahead. Just a quick bio. This is the EDL presentation. So my background is in a lot of hydrogen. So I started off at Ballard doing hydrogen fuel cells. And then I went into internal combustion engines for some time, and then got back into hydrogen with the hydrogen storage, solid state hydrogen storage. And then I spent some time developing lithium ion battery materials. So fairly broad space, and a lot of that was automotive, but I'm no longer working out of. Just pop to the next one, please. So EDL, we are a global producer of distributed energy. So we have quite a lot of different assets. We are based in Brisbane, and we have quite a lot in the US as well, and also in the UK. So just I'll try to jump through these actually quite quickly because it's a fairly long presentation, so I'll try to condense it a little bit. Within Australia, we have 57 sites, a number of different types of assets, and 25 of those sites are remote off-grid sites. So these are the islanded networks that I'll be talking about today. And we already have 3 of those are hybrid renewable sites. So traditionally, they run on either diesel or gas. And what we're doing is really trying to find how can we get as much renewables as possible into them. So, wow, next one. So our own journey through renewables, we first got into renewables in 2016 when we acquired some wind farms. Then we had a really interesting project at Coober PD where we converted the town to a hybrid renewable system with more than 70% renewable energy. That had about paid by ARENA, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. So it was quite expensive and took a lot of subsidies to get it to be break even. We then got into some solar, and then 2020, just last year during COVID, we actually commissioned our site at Agnew, and that's more than 50% renewables. And this time we only needed about 10% ARENA funding. So things have progressed just in those 3 years. Let's pop to the next one. This year, we're recently awarded Jabiru. It's now under construction. That's a solar only, and it's more than 50% renewable energy. So quite a lot of interesting technology in there. And now we have absolutely no ARENA funding. So it's completely standing on its own 2 feet. It was the most competitive offer from a financial point of view. So now what I'll be talking about is more, what do we do in the future? So near term, we're looking at in the next few years, we're starting to see with certain locations that we'll get even higher renewables if we have good resource, good wind and good sun. And we won't be needing any ARENA funding for that. And then this study that I'll be presenting is looking at, okay, well, how do we actually get to 100%? And to do that, we would, of course, well, you'll see, we would go back to needing some subsidies in order to achieve the actual 100%. But it really is just trying to understand what it would take to get there. Let's pop the next one. So I'll give a bit of a background on how it works in the remote site. So if we assume that we're starting with a site that's completely powered by something thermal, gas or diesel, we have the thermals in the orange, and the energy demand. This is a fairly flat energy demand throughout the day. That's in purple. If you arrive and you put in a little bit of PV or a little bit of wind, it's less than the energy demand, you immediately have all of that renewables is used. And so because the wind and the solar are actually cheaper than the thermal generation these days, you have an immediate cost reduction typically if you count it over the lifetime of the project. So go to the next slide. Now, if you start putting more and more in, it doesn't automatically just make more and more renewable penetration, because pretty quickly you're having power that's above the level of the actual demand. And what do you do with that extra power? It's just curtailed or spilled, different words for it, but you really can't use it. And what also happens is that in order to maintain reliability, you still keep the engines running. And this is the really frustrating thing, because you've got more than enough renewables to actually power your load. But if ever the sun suddenly there's a cloud that comes by, or the wind suddenly drops off, then we have to provide absolute total reliability to our customers. So we have to always keep the engines on in order to be able to respond immediately to that drop in generation. Speed pop, next slide. Now, what you can do though is if you add a power battery, you can turn off those engines. And so with a power battery, it has a high current, but doesn't actually have very much storage. And that makes a huge difference in your renewable energy penetration, because you can actually turn off the engines. And now if the solar drops off, that battery kicks in, gives you time to turn on the engines, and then you can keep keep operating and maintain that reliability. So that alone can make a pretty substantial improvement in your renewable energy penetration. Next one. And then there's the energy battery. So this is what typically people imagine when they think of a battery in a power station. This would be a much larger battery. You can store larger amounts. You really try to pick up that excess renewables and then use it when there's less renewables available. So from here, you have to put bigger and bigger battery if you want to get more and more renewable penetration. So what we've done here is we've taken a case study where if you look at a mine site and it initially has entirely thermal generation, in this case gas, and then progressively calculated higher and higher renewable energy penetration up to 100%. And that would be using both the power battery to be able to turn the engines off and then as it gets to higher renewable penetration, a bigger and bigger battery to cover those periods without generation. I'll just skip over some of the details and go to the next slide. And so this is where we end up. If you look at the y-axis, that's the net present cost over 20-year, and across the bottom is the percent renewable energy that's delivered over the course of the year. And the light green, solid light green, that is a $6 a gigajoule gas cost. That's a relatively typical cost that we might have at a mine site. And you can see that it's actually quite flat, up to about 60% in this case, 60% renewables. And so you can go, and that's why earlier we had numbers in the 50-60% renewables, because that's kind of where you can still get pretty good economics. If you had $12 gigajoule gas, we did this thinking, if you had a carbon tax or something, or you just had a difficult gas supply, then we see that it actually, the net present cost goes down as you increase renewables. And that's simply because over the years you can offset so much gas that you actually make it cheaper if you go up to more like the 70 to 80%. But no matter what your gas cost, as you get into the closer and closer to the 100%, you're using almost no fossil fuel anymore, but your storage has to go up very fast. And particularly those last couple percent, because that's like the rare event where you need to carry the load through for maybe a week at a time. Then you suddenly have to have all of that storage there. And that's why there's that huge uplift. I mean, even at the 95% mark, it's not too ridiculous, but 95 to 100, it just shoots straight up there. So jump to the next one. So this is where we started looking at, okay, well, how can we get to that 100% in other ways? One option that we looked at is to say, okay, maybe if we made hydrogen to store instead of battery storage. So hydrogen, I think everyone knows, electrolyzer, compress it, store it, and then use a fuel cell or potentially some form of combustion to turn it back into electricity. So this, however, is what you have to take into account when you look at the hydrogen. It's the efficiency is a huge hit. So if you have to deliver, say, 100 kilowatt hours to the load at night or whatever, when there's no renewables available, then how you store it has a big impact on how much you needed to generate in the first place. If you stored it with a battery, you only need about 120 kilowatt hours generation in the first place. If you use hydrogen and then a fuel cell, then it's more like 300. So immediately you have to build a lot more PV or a lot more wind and have all that extra spill that you're capturing. If you're going to combust the hydrogen, then it's even more. You have to go closer to the 500. So it's almost 5 to 1 ratio if you use hydrogen and you want to combust it back into electricity as opposed to a battery. And if you start thinking about the size of your PV farm or your wind farm, how much land you're taking up, resources, cost, all of these things, this has a huge impact. So we jump to the next one. Another impact of the efficiency and this fact that you have to build so much more is if you want to have the same amount of storage. So this is representing the same amount of storage. And again, there's that, in this case, this fuel cell, you need roughly 3 times as much excess as in the other one. But you also need a much bigger electrolyzer because it has to capture that excess. So your capital cost of your electrolyzer starts to be enormous as well as all of the extra PV and wind that you've had to construct. So next one, thanks. This, however, is where hydrogen it has a positive side. It's the actual capital of the electrolyzer and the fuel cell are very high, but the storage itself is extremely cheap. All you need are steel cylinders, and it's a lot cheaper than a battery. So we did just a very, very simplified calculation, but just to demonstrate that if you have say a 10 megawatt power that you want to deliver from your battery or your fuel cell, and you want to store more and more hours of that power, then the actual capital of the equipment that you need. And the green is the battery. So as you increase your storage capacity, it flattens out pretty quickly, but the hydrogen comes down much more rapidly in terms of how much you're paying per unit of storage. So somewhere around the 17 hours mark, and in this example, there was the crossover where if you're storing more than 17 hours, you would start to have less capital in your storage for hydrogen than for battery. So this is the same analysis as before, but now I've overlaid the purple with the solid purple is the hydrogen net present cost, and on the left we have the 2020. I think I forgot to mention earlier that all those costs were 2020 costs, and the dotted line is just simply the capital, and the solid lines are the net present cost. So you can see on the left that the 2020 cost at 90%, 95%, hydrogen is clearly a lot more expensive than battery for storage, but at the 100%, hydrogen comes out slightly ahead in the 2020 case. We then looked at 2040, so all of our projections for all of our equipment, whether it's PV, wind, battery, hydrogen, everything, trying to project out to fairly optimistic 2040 numbers. And in this case, because batteries are further down their learning curve, they don't reduce in cost quite as much as the hydrogen equipment does. And so you actually have a bit bigger advantage for hydrogen at the 100% mark. But it is still clear that even at 95%, the battery is substantially better than hydrogen, or substantially less expensive than hydrogen for your renewables. Next one. So just closing remarks. As the equipment costs will fall, then we would expect to see that hydrogen at the 100% mark would become a viable alternative compared to a battery. Some of the things we want to look at, other energy storage technologies, looking at flow batteries or mechanical storage, different types of energy storage that, to again, compare against the batteries or the hydrogen. We can also look at producing hydrogen somewhere else, because one of the reasons it's so expensive is that it's not actually used very often. You're only using the electrolyzer when you have spill, not all the time. So maybe if we produced it somewhere that was very high utilization, and that might be a different model to look at. And then look at other renewable fuels that would still get us to 100%. So things like biomethane or synthetic diesel from a biological source, or other types of fuels, because at that 100% mark, all of that CapEx to build up the renewables and all the other equipment, you could allow for a fair bit of operating costs if you just had even a very expensive fuel. And so yeah, so we're going to continue looking at how we can keep pushing our renewables higher and higher. Sorry, there's no cars in it.
Could I ask a question? So what is your assumptions in that about the future pricing of battery storage and cost of solar, cost of wind, and that type of thing?
It's hard off the top of my head. I think the batteries, they
Doesn't have
were,
to be specific, but what do
Yeah.
you see the trends being in the future?
yeah, for the batteries, I think between 2020 and 2040, we roughly divided in half the price. The PV, I can't remember exactly, probably,
What's the price of batteries considered?
I think we were at $200. Yeah, that includes the whole package, the entire battery energy system.
So in 10 years' time, we could be looking at $100 a kilowatt hour for batteries.
Usually the $100 a kilowatt hour refers to this. We're looking at the entire battery and controls and housing at the whole thing installed. So it's quite a different price comparison, but we're looking at it at about, I think it's about a 50% reduction in the battery cost. We took, I think a 90% reduction in the electrolyzer cost. So we were a little bit optimistic there. and yeah, some of the other PV and wind, they're quite a bit more reasonable because they've already come down quite a bit so much already.
So because just to relate it to
Yeah.
cars for a moment, the cost of one of the big things with EVs is obviously the price, and the battery component of that is
it's enormous.
seen as the significant portion of that is why an EV is so expensive, it is or not. But we're hearing that perhaps in the next 10, 15 years, the price of batteries will be halved, and we could perhaps expect to see EVs become a lot cheaper.
I would expect EVs becoming a lot cheaper. Yes, definitely. I think last time I looked was probably a couple of years ago, as I'm not really in automotive anymore, but they were typically something like 60% of the cost of the car. And that depends if you have a 200-kilometer range or 400-kilometer range, it's quite different, but they certainly are a very big part of the portion of the cost. And so if that comes down even 20%, it'll make a huge dent on the cost of the vehicle. And then there's also all the rest as well, the electric drivetrain, all those components will be coming down in the car as well, just as they get produced in larger quantities. So I would expect some quite significant drops in price.
So is there a reason why you wouldn't just keep the status quo for the last 5 to 10% of energy generation at these sites, and just, or is it an ideology to get to 100% renewable?
This was, oh, sorry. Yeah, so this was an exercise because there's a lot of people going around saying 100% is achievable, it's no problem, and actually the 100% is quite a bit more expensive than what I showed here, because if you start bringing in full reliability and all the other things, you get a lot more. So well, not in a remote site. All you have is what you build. So so what comes out of this is that you can take two sites from 0 to 95 for less expensive than one site to 100. Yeah. So if you want to use your capital in the most effective way to reduce carbon, then if you were government or something, you would say, well, make all of the sites 50% immediately, rather than try to get some sites to 100. If you use that capital, would be far more efficient. And as you saw in the graphs, the 50 to 60% range is very doable with current technology.
A lot of your sites, are they mine sites in Australia?
We have a number of mine sites and quite a few small communities as well.
Yeah. What were they prior to you coming along? Just diesel generator?
It depends. Most of the community ones are diesel, and because they're just very small loads. And the mine sites are usually gas powered with sometimes diesel backup.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions? I've got lots of questions. Fire away.
Time frame for the H2 being competitive, and basically using constructed and put into place. It's still probably 20 years down the track or 15 years down the track.
Well, though that was the interesting thing is that I was expecting the crossover to be somewhere maybe 80 or 90% renewables, but even at 2040, the 95% renewables was still better with batteries. And so the 100% renewables was better with hydrogen. And we used incredibly optimistic projections for the 2040 costs on hydrogen. So yeah, I mean, it's somewhere between 95 and 100% that hydrogen begins to beat batteries. And we haven't actually looked at the other energy storage options. We haven't looked at bringing in zero carbon fuels. So yeah, there's a few things we need to look at still, but even with trying to lean everything towards in favor of hydrogen, it still was a little bit challenging to make it compete.
Not a very good friend who's an engineer doing solar and diesel combos. And they're still looking at hydrogen as, down the track. And they're just keeping with the diesel for when they use the solar, and they're using batteries to sort of bridge. So it's interesting seeing how quickly the shift of that.
Is there any doubt that hydrogen is going to become a major part of infrastructure? Is there any doubt about that?
It depends on who you ask.
I'm asking you. What are your thoughts? Do you think like the trajectory that it's on? I know in your 2018 speech you started with hydrogen's the technology that's been coming for the last 10 years, the last 40 years, like that. Is it here, like at this point, would you say, because there would have been a point in time where EVs might have just been starting off 2010 or 12 or something like that, and now they're like well and truly a force. So do you think that this is there's a lot of talk about hydrogen? Do you think this is the point where it starts to actually get the government's talking about it? These groups like EVs are kind of like hydrogen cars are coming out in low volume, but they are there. So I think this is maybe the point where it gains a little bit more traction than it has before.
It's always hard to predict because you have to compare it to what are the other alternatives, and that was the point here was this was actually a study that was funded that was supposed to be for hydrogen, but we said, well, we'll start with a battery because that's how we would build it today. So we did that to compare and found that actually the battery stays competitive for a very long time, somewhere north of 95%. So I think there's still a lot of studies to be done. Where can you actually get to with hydrogen? Will it be competitive? I think that there's certainly a huge amount of funding and support going into it. So if it's going to get there, it will. But there's always all the other technologies. When I was developing hydrogen vehicles, there was absolutely no hope that a battery could ever power a vehicle. It was a well-known, obvious truth that no battery could ever power a vehicle, right? And so the hydrogen had every reason to succeed. Well, now that truth has changed quite a bit. So it's. I really hesitate to call the future because there's certain things pro and certain things against. Pipelines. There's a lot of focus on hydrogen for pipelines, but you can also electrify a lot of things. So hydrogen as a feedstock for ammonia and things like that. Well, I think that will have to go green, and so there's certainly a market there. But as far as broad-based energy carrier, I think that there's still some things to be decided, and it might be a local thing too, depending on what happens where.
Graham, did you have a question? You had your hand up.
We also assume some extremely aggressive improvements in the efficiencies with our 2040 numbers, but there are thermodynamic limits. And so, you will always be limited by physics. Simply won't let you go more than a certain level of efficiency. And it's not a great efficiency. It's still going to be quite low.
one of the things with batteries is the longevity. Something which is about longevity issues and maintenance issues. So, are there big maintenance issues?
I'd say they're somewhat similar. Batteries are a lot more developed now, so you would probably have, if you just went out and bought a battery today, it would have a longer life than if you just went. But fundamentally, there's quite a lot that's similar in what's going on inside, and the degradation mechanisms are different, but you can engineer to make things longer or shorter lifetime. So I'd say there's not a fundamental reason why there'd be a big difference between batteries and fuel cells in terms of longevity, but in a specific product, you could find very big differences.
Just wondering, at the moment with solar PV, has anyone done anything to do with thermal solar and say Stirling engines and adiabatic gas compression and done comparisons?
We work with we analyze solar thermal as well. The efficiencies are lower. The storage of thermals, the storage efficiencies are lower. You need a lot of space. There's different constraints with the solar thermal that PV tends to, in most cases, be better. Where we find that solar thermal comes into its own is if you need process heating at the right temperature. Then rather than put a PV in and then an electric boiler or whatever, you can just make a solar thermal directly. So there is application for solar thermal, I think, but for electricity, I would say PV is probably the best in pretty much every case.
We have a question from the live stream, which is, did you consider solid state batteries? So on the back of that also, is there other battery technology that was considered in your data?
In this, we just considered mainstream lithium-ion batteries and the expected or the optimistic projections in how they could come down in cost. We weren't really specific about exactly the chemistry because we just assumed that it stores energy and it has a certain cost. So this is quite a simple model in that respect. Solid state batteries, I think they're a little ways off. They're probably more likely to come into mobility applications before stationary, partly because they're more expensive, but also because one of the advantages is that you can package them a lot smaller because you don't have the liquid electrolyte that you need to contain. So they have certain advantages in mobility. Another thing with solid state batteries is that they're not as good at high power, and because there's a lot more ionic resistance in the solid state electrolyte. And so we would probably, at least with the power battery, stick to probably other types of the more existing types, but possibly in the storage. But at this moment, it's really hard to get any kind of costing or anything for 2040 in a solid state battery. So,
did you consider vehicle to grid setups that are potentially rearing up these days, where the batteries are in the EVs and stuff?
That's one thing we're looking at is how can we assist our clients to decarbonize the mine sites, and they're looking at electric vehicles or hydrogen powered vehicles and these sorts of things. We didn't include it in this study. We just considered that we have a load and we have a power station that has to deliver it. So it's a little bit simple in that respect.
Any other questions?
There's something I've heard of recently.
You solve it by not using those metals. So yeah, it's a very real issue. Particularly high strength steel has an extremely big problem with hydrogen embrittlement. So often you have to be very careful with hydrogen integration that was not designed for hydrogen. And there's just the embrittlement, there's other interactions with with like sealing materials, it'll sometimes make them brittle or swell or degrade. And so all the sealing needs to be quite different if it's exposed to hydrogen. You really have to look end to end, all the material compatibilities, and there's quite a few things. So yeah, that's definitely quite interesting.
So building a power plant that work on gas.
You would need to be very careful about the materials you choose. And that's one of the big challenges with the idea of converting pipelines to hydrogen, because they weren't intended for hydrogen in the first place. And not just the pipeline, but also all the appliances that use the hydrogen. Are they going to have trouble with their seals and their embrittlement of their materials? And there's some other issues also with putting hydrogen into things that were intended for gas. Hydrogen burns a lot hotter and has a much faster flame. So if you're putting it into a gas turbine, you can have it backfire because the flame's going so fast that it goes backwards. Or another thing is that the hydrogen flame is invisible. So if you have you can't actually see where the flame is, and it's going in places you don't want it. So and it's burning hotter, so you're creating more pollution in terms of the NOx, so the NO and NO2. So definitely some real challenges with putting hydrogen into things that were built without the hydrogen in mind.
All right. Is that it? Thank you very much for coming in tonight. I think a lot of us are probably quite comforted by your speech that batteries are the way to go, because we've invested in those personally. So very good to hear there's still a little bit of struggle in the hydrogen space. I was actually taken back a little bit last month with how much people were not that keen for hydrogen. But does anyone else want to say anything before we wrap up? No? All right. Well, thank you very much to our speakers once again. That was fantastic content, and we'll hang around for a bit of a chat. And thanks for coming.